Hey everybody, welcome back to the Jubilee, Freedom, and Shalom podcast. The low frequency is really booming in my headphones right now. Shalom. Sounds cool. I'm here with my buddy Nate Hale. We are glad to be back. We haven't recorded in a while. We did a little podcasting trick and recorded a bunch of episodes at one time because Nate was out of town doing stuff. And so, we're back. How have you been, Nate? What have you been up to?
Yeah, just trying to get my sanity back a little bit. Definitely doing some personal work and trying to get rested up. And I think definitely have let some, not complete hopelessness, but just some thoughts I needed to process and
Some discouragement.
Stuff going on, just pandemic stuff mostly, and what's coming down the pike, and for my specific church family. And I don't know, it's been a lot. And I think when you're a pastor, minister, it's kind of the way that the program is rigged is that everyone kind of gives their poison to you, and you're supposed to process that and give it back as something positive, So we're kind of like a Death Eater, if you will, like we're the worms that turn crap back into fertilizer that makes everything keep going around. But, especially when you feel heaviness, darkness, sadness, whatever it may be, it's really hard to know when and where the right time and place is to vocalize that and to process that, because you're supposed to be the one with the answers and the way forward. And so it's like if I wrote a song and I was like, I wrote this great song, I'm going to show somebody, and I go to Walmart and just like corner someone like in the tire section. I'm like, hey, check this song out I just wrote. It would just be inappropriate and weird. But, if I went down to, local coffee shop or whatever, and I was like, hey, here's a new song I wrote. Nashville, there's a place called the Bluebird Cafe that's, where all the songwriters go. Then it's like, this is the right time, right place. Like, share your song. Sounds great. Let's do it. So I think for ministers, I don't know about you, but it doesn't always seem like there's an obvious place to put those, those thoughts and moments. And so you're kind of like, I feel down, I don't know what to do. I need to talk through this. I'm sad, whatever. Or I'm frustrated, when do I get to say that out loud? And, I want to be the type of person that doesn't corner people at Walmart. And it's like, I'm sad and I need to talk about it.
Yeah, talk to me.
But also, I know that I'm a human being.
You need to process it with another person.
And I feel things. Yeah. And so sometimes I don't know if it's like I'm 6'5". I cut the beard off, but I don't know what it is, but it's just like, I don't know if it's because you're a minister or whatever. It's like, I think everyone would admit that no matter who you are, you could be tattooed from top to bottom and, just look like you're the most intense person ever. But everyone would admit everyone has feelings. Like, I don't think anyone would logically say that there's one human that doesn't have feelings.
Right.
But for some reason that doesn't necessarily translate into creating space for everyone at some appropriate moment to express it. Yeah. And I think that's something that, maybe if you are thinking of your pastor, your minister, your, the person that tries to cover you and bring more peace and sanity and, tries to quell the chaos in your life, just remember they're human beings that feel things too, and make sure that you're trying to look out for them.
Yeah, it's tricky because members of a church, the place they go is to the minister, but there isn't like a next level up for us to go to necessarily. You know what I mean? So but that's just something we have to. Part of the deal, we got to figure it out.
Yeah.
Not just like within ourselves get over it, but find people who are, there's no conflict of interest. They're just there to listen, third party. And
a pastor to the pastor.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a bit of a, I hope everyone's trying to say and can just, maybe be that person for a pastor out there that's the pandemic stuff is just really the political stuff, the pandemic stuff, the politicized pandemic stuff, the racial conversations. There's just a lot that's really come to a I don't know if a fever pitch is the right way to say it, but just most of the time we kind of go along through life kind of like, I'm fine, everything's fine, it doesn't really affect me, kind of thing. But I just feel like we've come out of those places. A lot of us have been personally affected by X, Y, or Z over the last couple of months, and we're wanting to talk about it, express our opinion on it.
Yeah.
So anyways, so yeah, that's where I'm coming from. What's been the latest thing kind of you've been mulling over?
Yeah, I've felt some discouragement in my particular church family. We have a lot of people leaving for various reasons, but it can get discouraging at times. And just, everyone's all over the place in terms of how they feel about everything. And it's impossible to please everyone, which I already knew that, but it's a different thing to watch it actually play out in different scenarios. Right. So it's been a little bit discouraging, but I really am excited about who is still with us and my fellow staff members and the vision that we have for what church could look like going forward, and what we're doing in the youth ministry and all that is still really exciting to me. And so I've been receiving a lot of affirmation from that. But definitely been thinking about a lot. I guess the words that come to mind are just love and grace, which we could all use more of all the time, especially right now. But just thinking about, how I look at ministry and what I'm doing with my time. And not every moment that I'm with every student needs to be a teaching moment. Not every group gathering needs to carry some kind of theological point or make them walk away with some knowledge of something biblically related. Even though that's all good, and we have plenty of time to do that, and we do that frequently, and the churches of Christ have historically been really good at that, even though there's nothing wrong with that. But just been mulling over in my head a lot about, in the current setup we have for church, what does it look like to live? I don't even know how to form the question. But yeah, to exist together and to disciple and to grow and to even evangelize in a way it's not about knowing stuff for the sake of knowing stuff, but it's about a relationship with God. How do we communicate his love and his grace and the thing that he's already done that should be convincing in and of itself and is, how do we communicate that to people that don't go to church with us? And how do we communicate that to people that do? And so thinking more on the youth ministry side, I've just been thinking about what can I do when I'm with the time that I have with the fellows in the youth group that communicates love and grace in a way that disciples. Because I think no one ever said this out loud to me, but maybe they did, I don't know. But it was like either or, you're wasting your time with somebody if you don't have a Devo at the end of the event, if that makes sense.
Right.
And I get that. I get where that comes from. And I'm not opposed to having Devos, but what we're finding in our students is what they really want is they just want to talk to you. They want to have a conversation with you. And the most productive thing that I can do is actually be more of a missionary than a youth minister. The best thing I can do is sit in people's homes. It's to go to their games. It's to have them over to my home. It's to sit outside with a cup of coffee when it's cold. It's to rake some leaves for some elderly couple at our church, or whatever it is, and in that have conversation, getting to know each other a little bit better, and then diving deeper from there. And so I've just been thinking about that a lot lately, because before the pandemic, I guess I'll say it the reverse way. The pandemic has forced us to have a ministry that looks a lot more like that. And I'm sure you feel the same way. And if any youth ministers or ministers in general are listening to this, I'm sure you feel the same way. Beforehand, it's really easy. Easy is a comparative, but it's simple to have an event, to advertise it on Sunday mornings and to get people to show up. For us, having like Sunday morning class time is easy. We didn't really have to announce it. Just people knew there was Bible class for the youth group at 10 o'clock. And so we did it. And I think took that for granted in a lot of ways. And obviously that kind of thing isn't happening anymore. And instead of just hoping for the day that it does, saying, well, maybe there was something wrong with how we were doing that. Maybe the right thing to be doing, or right comparative again, but the better thing to be doing is to do something that won't get tossed around by a pandemic or an election or whatever ends up happening in the world. We lose our building, or it loses power, or I don't know, whatever the situation is, it doesn't get affected. We say, actually, our ministry is more like we go out and they come over to our house and we go to them and we meet here. And it's more of like a grassroots on the ground type of thing, rather than let's all gather in one place every Sunday and Wednesday.
Yeah.
So that's just something. It's a long walk for a short drink of saying that's kind of, I've been thinking about what can we do differently.
Yeah. It's kind of a little bit of a loss of control. And so because
what do you mean?
It's not as predictable or as contained as like, this is what it is. This is what it looks like every week.
You can't settle into a habit that.
Right. You don't know when the moment's going to, be right, or, when it's going to come. You're just living with people. And as conversations come up,
that's the best way to think to say it, is just, how can we in youth ministry, even we can't, it just looks different because of the age difference. And, our kids are still in their parents' households. What does it look like to live with our students? And,
and so just being ready for when you don't know exactly when or how the conversation of Christ is going to come up, or, what they're going to ask, or how they're going to ask, or what they have behind the question.
Sure.
It's like I said, it's just a little bit of a loss of control because it's not as scripted and it's not as knowable. And
it's a lot more exciting to me.
I never go into conversations where I'm like, all right, Daniel, let's have coffee, and today's conversation is going to be about, whatever. Someone sits down and you're like, so elections next week, what do you think is going to happen? And
right.
Will the world go crazy? And if this person wins, and if that person wins, and you never know where the conversation is going to go. Right. Sometimes I jokingly sit down with people, and when the conversation dies, I'm like, well, we don't have anything to talk about. You guys just want to talk about religion and politics? People are like,
I actually have something now.
Yeah, now we have lots to talk about. So it's been definitely in those days of just finding it when and where it comes. Like, you just don't know, but being ready and being interruptible is another one. It's just like, before it's like, no, we talk about these things at this time.
So if it's not that, don't bring it up.
Well, if it came up any other time where it's like, well, I'm trying to get over here and do these things today and check this list of stuff off, and someone's like, can we talk? There's been moments where I still remember praying at a house church on a Sunday night one time about God just open our eyes up, to how and when and where we can evangelize and speak about God. And and we talked about all kind of the versions of that
Yeah.
we've seen in the past and
Sure.
how it creeps us out a little bit. Not creeps us
Sure.
out, but just makes us feel icky when people do the street corner preaching and all that, kind of yelling at people and evangelizing, whatever word, image comes to mind when we say evangelism. But it's like, yeah, in those moments, So I remember taking a student out to lunch the next day at a Chili's, and I'm talking to him, trying to catch up on his life, and the waitress was just like, "Hey, I could tell both of you guys are Christians. Like, I really need to talk to somebody." And she straight up just like sat down with us in our booth and took like her, quote unquote smoke break. And she's just, so it's like me, a college student, and this lady. And I've just been praying the night before, like, God, show me, and in my brain, I'm just like, man, I'm trying to talk to this dude. Like, you're just supposed to wait our table and like let us have our conversation, But I mean, I was catching myself like as it was happening. I was like, no, like this was literally what I prayed about last night. Like that God would just set up these conversations. So she sits down, she says like, I'm a grandmother. My daughter hasn't made the best decisions. I'm looking at potentially adopting my grandson because he's not being taken care of very well by his mom. But I work at Chili's and all this stuff. So she starts telling her life story, opening up about some stuff that a lot of people would take some time to feel comfortable, saying something about. But anyways, she sat down and I had to catch myself. I'm like, be interruptible, be ready for that moment when it comes. You don't know who it's coming from or when it's going to happen or how caught off guard you may be. And so,
And so then the following thought for me is like, I want to be ready. Like so then it becomes, I'm not prepping for sermons, so to speak. I'm not prepping for these predictable things that are happening. I'm actually just training myself as a follower of Jesus to be ready to receive those, and then to have a discerning spirit of not necessarily knowing ahead of time what to say, but being in tune with the Spirit to be able to respond to whenever that moment does come up and to not miss it when it does. So that actually is a pretty good segue to talk about the image of God.
Yeah. So me and Daniel have been wanting to talk about the image of God because it's as far as first principles go, it's definitely in the beginning, of the biblical story and of where we kind of start our way of answering the question of like, why am I here? Where am I going? What's the point of this life? All those kind of big questions.
Right.
A lot of it starts and grows out of the image of God.
Yeah.
That comes up in the first chapter of Genesis. So, we're admittedly heavily influenced by the BibleProject, and
shouts out.
It was one of their first series that they did was on the image of God. It was really important for me to listen to those episodes. I would encourage everyone that's listening to this. I think it was episode 10, 11, 12, maybe 13 as well. But to just go and listen to those and get some historical context, like, you're talking to a Babylonian guy, 10,000 years ago, and like, I'm the image of God. Like, what would he hear when you're saying that?
Right.
And also to try to bring that forward to us today and say, okay, in my modern context, what is God? What is that really saying about me, who I am, what my part to play in this story is?
Right.
So I'd literally like to go through some of that today with you guys and let Daniel reflect on those, the things that you've thought about in relation with God calling us His image.
Let's do it.
So, would you you want me to ask you a question, or you ask me a question?
You can ask me a question.
All right. So, like to a person that was reading or even writing Genesis, which is kind of hard to think about.
That is crazy.
Who wrote Genesis? But what I feel like saying we're the images of God was probably a fairly scandalous thing to say.
Oh.
But to a modern reader, most of us just read over it and keep moving. So what was being, if you're called an image of God back in the day, what were
back in the day? Good question.
What were you really saying?
Yeah. So in biblical times, from what we can collect from the history of different civilizations, you would actually probably be used to certain people claiming that they were the image of God, using that phrase. It wouldn't just be your average Joe, but it would be most everyone at the time lived under the rule of a king, and kings themselves thought, or they proclaimed and thought of themselves typically as being gods, whatever their gods are, whatever the chief of those gods were for them, that they were that God's image on earth.
Or an embodiment of that God, like
Right,
a physical manifestation.
right. Which means they had the authority to carry out the will of the gods. Which, if you think about it, to the idea of the image of God doesn't immediately make sense to us. But if you think about a king thinking that they are a god, just think about what a king is able to do. I mean, anything you want to do, anything you want to have, you have it.
Yeah, it's
You know
a
what I mean?
pretty slick worldview that
Yeah,
serves the purpose of a king, or just like, hey,
sure.
anything I am literally the image of God, so therefore anything I want, desire, think, want to do in
Right.
this world, like it just by default is also what the gods want, because I am a physical manifestation
Right.
of the gods. So
And it's a logical loop, because the doing whatever you want to do, you can prove that you're the God's manifestation on the earth. But at the same time, um, you, just practically what a king was able to do, just practically forget any connection to any god, was essentially be a god over a piece of land and a group of people, right? They could execute whoever they want to execute. They could, cancel any execution they wanted to. They could
right.
attack any country, any other nation they wanted to. They could build higher walls. They could have more gold. They literally didn't care if they killed people in the process of building things. And so they could build something as fast as they wanted, or as big as they wanted. And it didn't matter.
Yeah.
Um,
They're calling all the shots.
calling all the shots, and there was no one to check that. I mean, we have checks and balances and stuff in our government that prevents things like that, but they had none.
He had no red tape to deal
No,
with.
none,
There's no
zero.
codes department, no Supreme Court justice. There was no Congress. You had to convince everyone, get the political will
Right.
towards you.
At best, he
Basically,
had a group of advisors,
right.
and if he was like, "I want to kill these people," they would be like, "Well, maybe not,"
Yeah.
but he
So
could still do it.
all you had to really worry about is, that your military didn't turn on you. And
Right. Someone
if
didn't assassinate
if
you.
they really, really, really believed in you're the son of God, you're the image of God, then they would be attacking their own gods, which
Right.
would probably be a bad idea.
Bad mojo.
Yeah. So
Yeah. So that I mean, it makes sense. Like, that is the kind of, those are the people that are referring to themselves as images of God. And not just that, those same kings would also create idols, which is something else we think of when we think of the image of God. Just statues of, wood and stone or whatever materials they had. And some of those statues would be them, because if they were the physical representation, the physical embodiment of their gods on earth, then clearly, like, they're gonna be the thing that they want the people to bow down to. So they would build these idols and statues of themselves, or of some of the other gods, and those were images of God. Those were physical embodiments. No one actually believed that thing was the God. It was a representation of the God.
right.
And just like the king was.
So what is it that this other people group, the Israelites, the Jews, are making a statement in their Genesis story? This is where we came from, to say that we are the image of God, is saying that every person is a king or a queen with divine, like, authority to call all the shots on planet Earth on behalf of this God. They were not saying that whatever a human desires is automatically what Yahweh desires. So it was
Right.
a little different way around, where it's like, well, a manifestation of God, and I guess this is what
I
Zeus wants
want it,
today.
therefore God wants it.
Therefore, Zeus wants it. So it was, God is the king. We're his image bearers. So given that quality to everyone, and what it also equated to is on building idols and all that kind of stuff, like you said about building something in the likeness of the king or of the gods, it also resulted in a culture that said, no, we're not going to do that, because why carve, stone or carve wood into a shape of something, like we already are that thing.
Right. God already created images of himself.
And it's us. So not only does it give some kind of like major quality to every human being that's more equal than just this one person in a society is the image of God, and the rest of us are just peons. We all share the image.
Mm-hmm.
And number two, it equates to, we can't, there's no point to build an idol, because, where heaven and earth meet is in us.
Right.
So,
yeah. And so in the beginning of the Bible, we see our God is an all-powerful creator and king of earth. He has all authority. He speaks and creates. And one of the first things he does is create mankind and give us all of the authority to rule over the things he's created. And he doesn't speak that over anybody else or anything else. He doesn't call mountains his image. He doesn't call rivers his image. He doesn't give his image to the elephants or the giraffes or any of that, to any fruit, to any insect, whatever. None of it. The only thing that he grants that authority to is human beings to co-rule with him. And so when you think about, these kings that are calling themselves the images of God, they pretty much, they do whatever they want, and it gives them a get out of jail free card, or it gives them a reason to do whatever they want to do. If we look at the glory of our God, and what does he emanate? It's creating, it's making order out of chaos. It's bringing shalom. It's self-giving love. It's sharing what he owns. It's cultivating what he's created and harnessing all the potential of what he's created and moving it forward.
yeah.
And so that as his physical embodiments, that is what we are to do as image bearers.
So when I think about that, it makes me reflect on, like, I think even in our, like, we don't call each other kings and queens and monarchies, and at least those types of governments have become very rare on planet Earth, like true monarchies. But we definitely still stratify, like, who's the most important, who's least important.
Definitely.
There's the president, and then there's, us. And I think many times we can almost, look at presidents as people that have like more than a regular human existence. Like, I don't know, when I was a kid, at least, I used to think of presidents as like, they must know so much. And like, God might even talk to them every day because they're the leader of a nation. Like, maybe they just, even in like a mystical way, like have a different human experience than I do, because they're the way up there people. Maybe they talk to aliens every day. Maybe they just, I'm sure they know things that no one else knows. But like, I remember watching a documentary called Fog of War, where it was recounting with the what was he, Secretary of Defense to JFK during the Cuban Missile Crisis. And his name is Robert McNamara. And so he's like a 9-year-old man in the documentary. They're interviewing him and doing a bunch of flashback stuff as he's telling stories. And I just remember this one part of it where he's just like, we were, 12 guys sitting in a room, and in retrospect, with bad intel, trying to decide if there was a nuclear bomb in Cuba that could wipe out, all of Miami and South Florida. And we had our fingers on the trigger of nuking the entire island of Cuba, and not just wiping every human life out on the island of Cuba, but wiping out every single living thing on the island of Cuba, every plant, insect, rodent, everything, where it would just be dirt. And we didn't have all the facts. We didn't have, like, we had our fingers on those triggers with so much power and so much consequence, you know, at our fingertips. Right. And just to hear a guy that was in that room and had that conversation be so humble and honest about, like, we were just people making these decisions. You're just like, whoa, whoa, whoa. That is a crazy thought. Y'all are supposed to be kind of like next level humans, man. You can't just be making decisions like that and just saying, well, we're just guys like you are. You know, it's like, no, we expect you to be like demigods that are kind of Herculean, like maybe not a god, but, you know, on the next level.
Sure.
And that's kind of a scary thought, because I think a lot of us want to be ruled over. We want someone else to be the image of God, and for them to answer all the hard questions and do all the hard work, and us just be like, yeah, that's too much thinking to do.
Right.
You just tell me where to march, and I'll march that direction. Or we don't even want that. We don't want to ask the questions, and we also don't want to get bossed around. We literally don't want to do anything. And I think when we talk about the image of God, I think everyone is supposed to be a leader. I think I could confidently walk away from considering what the implication of image of God is. If the Bible calls you an image of God, and every human is, we're all called to leadership. It's like, well, I'm not a leader. I'm not up for, it's like, okay, we can talk about how leadership expresses itself. It's not always like the person up front in front of the camera or whatever, however we define it. But everyone is supposed to eventually become a leader if we are fully embracing our call that God put on us from the first chapter of Genesis.
Right. And people failed it over and over again in the Old Testament. And I mean, we still do, but then we get to Jesus. So thinking about being a leader, like you look at the life of Jesus, who's the new human, perfect image of God. He doesn't have anything that we don't have. Like, he's 100% a human being, and he makes that abundantly clear time and again. And he lives out the life of being a perfect image bearer, and he was leading. He was on the front lines. And again, like, if that, we can talk about whether that means being, the person that's talking all the time or not. But what he expresses is that the true human lives with a true image bearer, does not look at themselves and think, what is best for me? And I think this is what you mean by leading in some way. They don't look at what's best for them. They look at what's best for everyone, what's best for the other person. And that's what they do. And most of the time, not all of the time, but most of the time, like, that is going to be the thing that is best for you. But the point is not to get yours or for you to be better off. The point is self-giving love and generosity.
Right. And because if you look at leader as someone who's like, all right, everyone shut up and follow me, then no
one wants to follow that person. It's
like, you'll just have, 7 billion people on earth all running in opposite directions of each other.
Right.
But, this is underpinned by just like God wants me to dominate and, have dominion over the earth. That's what he said. But with God's heart and intention, you're supposed to be his image.
Yeah.
So it's like, if you just want to be a slave driver
and the authority part, we don't want to take
it's like
the actually reflecting him part.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like you have to hold those two things together, or it goes, being a leader that's not Christ-like. That is I've heard this before. It's just like, why didn't Satan have a son? God had a son. Why didn't Satan have a son? It's like, well, Satan's son there would be a coup, and he would assassinate his father to take over control. Because they wouldn't agree on anything, because the definition of, the gig is that do whatever you want whenever you want. And Jesus constantly surrendering to his Father, yielding to his Father, giving authority and dominion to his Father. It's like God has a son, because his son, even after the cross, he gives all glory and honor to God, and then God gives it back to him. He freely gave whatever he earned through the cross, whatever status he earned through the cross, back to God. And it's just like, if there wasn't evil, the evil would be trying to scheme and undermine and eventually assassinate, kill, and steal whatever power could be taken.
Right.
So,
yeah. And I think of, it would be plenty good, just the truth that we are children of God, that we've been adopted by the sacrifice of Jesus. We've been grafted into the family of God, whatever image you want to use. That news by itself is great. And that by itself would be a great life, I think, to say, like, just to be even called a child of God is something in and of itself. You know what I mean? But for some reason, God has decided to not only adopt us into his family and call us his children and heap grace and love on us. He's actually said, on top of that, I love to share, and I want to share this with you. I now grant, by creating you, and this is not like Adam and Eve didn't have this. I've heard people say, like, well, just Adam and Eve were made in the image of God, and then it's just kind of descended from there. No, and every single person that has been created in the image of God and bears his likeness. And a part of that is the authority, but a part of it is the expectation that if this is going to go well, you are going to look through the eyes of God. You're going to use his wisdom. And so, to be his child, but also to have the authority given. Yes, it can be abused, but that's the risk that God has been willing to take, to say, like, I want to share this with human beings. And so what we haven't done, what only Jesus has done, is from the beginning to the end of a life, said, I'm going to deflect every time and say, like, I will feel my flesh, like that story even that you're talking about with the waitress and the student. Like, in your soul, in your human body, you wanted to be like, we'll talk later. I'm trying to do my thing for me. Like, I want to be doing this. But instead saying, I'm going to take wisdom from God's eyes and say, it's not about me, it's about him. And talk to the waitress, or, whatever the situation is. Mm-hmm. And when it comes to that, I think, man, it gets crazy as far as how we were talking this before we started recording. It gets crazy how many areas of life that starts to influence the way that you look at people, the way that you talk about yourself, the way you treat yourself, the way you treat other people, the way you treat the piece of land that you live on, the way that you deal with your living space, the way that you host or don't host people, the way that you give generously or not. Like, all of that then becomes like, okay, I'm not only just a child of God, but I've been granted authority to rule, and I'm a king or a queen of this here earth that God has given.
Yeah. So when I have heard image of God growing up, and more frequently, as an adult, the context I typically hear it in is usually when we're talking about racism. We're all made in God's image. Someone is treating someone else poorly, and someone's referencing that as we're all made in God's image. You're like, yeah, okay. And that's a good place to start, obviously, with that conversation, because if you really think that this other is made in the image of God, Yeah, it would totally change how you treat them, how you take care of them, how you look out for them. It should.
Yeah.
But I think the other side of the coin that I have not heard it used as much, it's usually to someone is being treated poorly down, look down at, it's to level and equal and bring the treatment
Justice of some kind. Yeah.
back. And yeah, it's like someone's being treated down. Let's bring them back up to remembering we're all made in the image of God. What I don't hear it referenced to as much, I don't know if I hear it very much at all, is what that means for us. Not just like, hey, you're treating that person bad. Like they're in the image of God. Oh yeah, forget about that. Like I should treat them
My
like
bad.
the image of God, which is true. That's good. That's good. Please don't take me the wrong way. I'm not being facetious about that's a dumb way to use that. No.
It's a great way.
So on the flip side of that coin, though, what does that mean for you? If you're made in the image of God, you are God's ambassador to earth to do whatever God would be up to, because he doesn't want to just say like, hey Nate, stand to the side, watch. He cracks his knuckles and he goes to work, and you're just like, wow, did you see that universe God just made? Wow, look at that planet. Wow, I can't even, how do you come up with this stuff? You're not just standing on the side going, wow, he's working with all of us to turn, this earth into, just like what the BibleProject, one of their quotes is just like, the image of God in the Bible is that we're, given. It shows that ruling over the earth means to cultivate it, harness its raw potential, and move creation forward. So that's the side of it that I don't think we talk about the image of God very much. We talk about it leveling and equaling when someone's being treated poorly. But when it comes to, okay, now what do we do with the fact that we're all the image of God? Is that we're supposed to be, exploring, discovering, creating, seeing the world through God's eyes, and trying to bring, the garden that was planted in Eden by God out into the entire world.
Right.
And this brings up that conversation about was the Garden of Eden perfect? And it's like, no, it wasn't perfect. Why? Because it wasn't finished. Adam and Eve
Done.
it wasn't just sit here in this garden and look at everything I did and say, whoa, forever. It wasn't completed. It was, even all of Eden wasn't a garden. It says there was the world and there was a place called Eden, and in Eden there God planted a garden.
Right.
So like their job was to take the garden out and fill Eden and fill the entire earth up with,
well,
the world had been chaos and God had brought it, into order through this garden, and they were supposed to perpetuate that.
And then look at the final picture of the new heavens. Like the new Eden in Revelation is a city. So very clearly it wasn't supposed to just stay as a piece of dirt land. Like this was to be built, and it has become something greater.
Yeah, so it's so what we need in our being the image of God is a few things, or we'll go off the rails really quick. We need to actually know what the character of God is, who he is, how he thinks, what he would do if he were here, what his hope, what his heart is, what is, everything that he looks and sees the potential in, to have the same eyes for that person, that place, that thing.
And that's so crucial, because you think about the kings of old were claiming they were the image of God. We do the same thing. We claim to be God because we've claimed to know how to run our lives. And I don't know about you, but my life isn't, if I'm in charge, my life does not go well. And if I live for me, I hurt a lot of people and I bring a lot of suffering and a lot of chaos in the world. That very clearly is not how God meant for it to go. And so I think that one, I'm glad you brought that up, because I think that's so crucial to even to the beginning. It's like, yes, it's about how you treat people and all that. But when it comes to moving creation forward as a king or a queen, we have to be in tune with what God is up to already and how we can join that, but also what God has been doing and what we believe he would be doing if he were here. Like, what is his character? And so we need to be in tune with the Spirit and step with the Spirit and understand where we've been to understand where we're going. And I think people, I don't know if this freaks people out. It kind of doesn't freak me out. I am bad at disciplining myself, but praying for that. Like, I don't know if we just don't think that there's power to that or something, but just praying that God would give us eyes to see the world the way that he sees the world. That he would give us eyes to do, give us hands, give us a heart to do the things that he would do. Because we are his image, therefore we are reflecting him to the world. And so that I'm glad you brought that up first, because I think that is maybe the most crucial thing, because just saying you're the image and then living how you've always lived after listening to this conversation, just walking away and saying like, yeah, and then going and living normally like you always did, that's not it. And we need to seek the character of God and become more like him.
Right.
And thankfully, he sent his son, which was really sweet. I'm really glad that he did that. And we have 4 books, thank goodness, that have part of his ministry and his life and his words and his teaching. And becoming like him is becoming like God, becoming like Jesus. And I don't know, I think like that is crucial before you even try to start doing anything else, like to have an understanding of what God is trying to do.
Right. And I think a lot of us don't really live with the truth that, like, I think a lot of us have a sense that our day-to-day life is a slow treadmill to nowhere.
Right.
Like,
we're just looking forward to the day we get to leave here.
We're just maybe there's some ambitious people out there that are like, I want to go for fame, riches, glory, the hottest wife, whatever people go after. I think we can all say that those things will end up like letting us down.
Right.
So what do we do with that, though? It's like there's still a trajectory to history, though. Like there's still a thing that's happening.
Right.
And if you don't feel like that, it's just like, no, people just live and they die, and then that will go on and on forever. That's just what life is. It's like, no, history is actually going somewhere. History is actually moving towards a singular point. It started in the beginning. The story starts with humans as the image of God, reigning and ruling, co-ruling with God on earth. And that's also how the story ends, is human beings as the image of God, co-ruling and reigning on earth. And I don't think a lot of us think about that, because, there's like one parable that talks about, because of these good, the master gives these people this much and this person this much, and then someone buries it in the ground. And it's the parable of the minas or the talents. There's 2 different ones. But in one of those, the reward is for the good servant is, I'm going to let you rule over 10 cities, 5 cities, 2 cities, because I've thought about that recently, and I'm just like, oh, heaven should be easier than that. I don't want to be the governor of some place. That sounds like a lot of hard work. It's like, no, but there will be these heavenly cities on earth, and they'll be managed by the saints. Like, I think a lot of us would look at politics and all stuff like, oh no, I never want to be the president. Like, that would be so hard. I just want to do my little thing, my own little backyard. I don't want to think about all that stuff. It's like, no, God's called us, all of us, to that. The faithful servants are going to be people that are put in charge of cities in the moment where God's reign is completely present on planet Earth. Like, we shouldn't think so lowly of ourselves, where it's just like, oh, who am I? I'm just some dumb Christian over here. Like, let the experts, figure all the big stuff out.
Right.
The story of humanity starts and ends with humans co-reigning on planet Earth for, setting the course of history for planet Earth as they walk alongside God. So it's just like, do we really believe and think that when we're making decisions every day, how we're treating our backyard, whatever God has given us the authority over, our time, our money, the spaces that he's given us, are we just mowing the grass and moving on? Or are we dreaming for it? Yeah. And that's something that, number one, as someone who's tried to be okay with like try to embrace that and live it, there's two things. It's like, it's really cool because you do see all this potential. It's also somewhat hellish because the world is, you realize how in opposition the world is
to the character of God,
to you doing, and trying to pursue, okay, if I totally gave God the use and like whatever God's vision is for what would he do with it? I don't think I have the guts to do that because my neighbors might think I'm weird.
right?
Like, that's how quick I am to give up on, okay, God, I'm gonna put these glasses on. I'm gonna see the whole world, my whole life, and through the potential that you see it. And I get to, so I'm like, oh wow, yeah, I think this is what God would do.
Yeah.
And then you're like, I couldn't do that. People would think I'm weird.
Right.
And then you're done. And
Yep.
and that's kind of a weird place to stop, because you're just like, oh, all of a sudden it's not the president's fault. It's not the governor of Tennessee's fault. It's not someone else's fault. It's the mayor of Nashville is stupid. It's no, I can't even dream from my own backyard.
Right.
Like, who am I? And so here's another
And it's not
thing.
even just the not having vision for your own, what you have influence over, but when we choose to live, I'm thinking like relationally, when we choose, I'd really squish that word together, relationally, when we think that direction, just the way that we live and the way that we treat people, are we dreaming for what our relationships could look like? And I'm not talking about just your marriage. If you're married, like, that's great. Or if you're dating someone, like, dreaming for that, yeah, that's one thing. But I'm talking about anyone you have contact with regularly that is a friend or family or something. Like, are we dreaming forward for that person and for that relationship? Because what we normally do, if we are not doing that, we are creating deserts in our relationships. Like, we're not thinking forward, saying like, what, think about the heart of God. What would God be doing in this relationship? How would he be supporting this person? And what would this relationship look like? The question that we're thinking about the other day, Emily and I, was we challenged some of our students to think about their relationship with their sibling and say, like, live proleptically, which means the already not yet. Live, there's this kingdom that is coming one day. It is on its way. Jesus was the inauguration, but live like it's already here, even though it's not yet. Like, live out of that hope. So think about that with your relationships. So the challenge was, live a week proleptically with your siblings. Live as if you are in heaven. Like, what would your relationship with your sibling look like in heaven? Live that way now. Thinking about that with any relationship we have, like, what would this look like in the kingdom one day when Jesus returns? Like, let's live like that, because otherwise we bring a lot of sin and suffering and hurt and chaos, and then it's just drama after drama, and then we have, our relationships are good for a while, and then something else happens, and yada yada yada. But
Yeah,
live forward and say, like, what would God be doing here?
yeah. I think this kind of helps me explain a little bit of why I am so curious about the nature of things, the nature of organizations, the nature of nature. Like, why does Nathan care so much about plants and animals and farming, stuff like Jesus wasn't a farmer. And you're like, okay, fair enough. But if I'm really the image of God, that would have an intimate knowledge of his creation, like, and a curiosity to know that. You see that a little bit with Solomon, where the Queen of Sheba comes to visit him, and he's the wisest man on earth, and he's explaining to her how this thing works and how that thing works, and she's just mind blown. She's like, oh, he's like, he has come alongside how the world works, and he's understood how it works so much that he's able to accelerate the flourishing of life.
Instead of ignoring his authority as an image bearer.
Right. And he was doing it. And it manifested itself in how he worked alongside the created world and how much he was able to flourish. I think people, I'll put it this way. I think that there's a version of Christianity where we sing and we pray and we do Bible studies and we read Christian books and we read through the Bible once a year, and the world is still turning into a desert. And there is extinction after extinction after extinction because we are not really understanding. It's not just singing, praying, talking. If we're going to be an image bearer, that means we have to know who God is, what he's like, and all that, but also have an intimate knowledge of how he made this world to work. There is a right answer and a wrong answer to that. There is if you jump off a building, you'll fall. That's called gravity. So therefore, like, we should live life according to knowing that if you jump off a building, you'll go splat. And you could want to change that. And you're like, well, that's not cool. I want to fly. And it's like, well, God didn't make you with wings. So like, and maybe he made you to where you can build wings and somehow incorporate them in biologically to your body. Well, then that, if it's plausible, then God, then you have to explore whether God wants you to do that or not. But I just know when I walk off buildings, I fall and it hurts. That's all I know. And so we have to work with that. I know that, that when water comes out of the sky, it goes down the stream, it somehow makes its way out to the ocean, the sun hits the ocean, it evaporates back up into liquid, and then forms clouds and it rains again and does that cycle over and over and over and over. And it's just like, okay, well then we should live life knowing that and wrap our mind around that and work with it, because we're literally living in this like perpetual motion machine that like just keeps going. You're like, you would think all the rain would just fall out of the sky and then that would be the end of it. But God created, he's like, no, actually, water can turn back into gas and that gas goes in the sky and comes back. And you're like, whoa, that's nuts.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, okay, we should work with that. And there's certain animals, like we talked about keystone species a few episodes ago, where it's like, the beaver, he just can't stand it. He's like, I got to cut down that tree and stop this water and slow it down. And I'll do that to the day I die. And, he forms lakes and rivers are slowed down, and his dam becomes like a filter, like a kidney for all the waterway. All this stuff happens. And then other creatures like, hey, there's a pool we can swim in right here. And then, it all flourishes after that. Like, okay, well then why work against that? And Solomon seemed to have gotten that. And when he was walking around showing the Queen of Sheba his palace and his gardens and all this stuff, she's just like, dang, I heard some crazy stories about this dude, and I thought half of them could be true, maybe. After talking to him, I'm realizing that they were all true, and
it was only half the story.
It was only half of the stories. And that's because of that wisdom that comes with, he understood not only who God was and his nature, but how he created his nature and was working with it. That's probably one of the better ways I can say, why are you, when people ask, hey man, you're kind of like a hippie, you worship nature and all this stuff. I'm like, no. I pursued that knowledge because God created it, and I get to know a little bit of him when I connect the dots. I'm like, oh wow, that's how that all works together. Mm-hmm. I see God in that wisdom and that like just how effortless, and I don't know what's the right word for it. Like when I see how the world ticks and how it's
the order,
you're just like, dang, that is so cool and so mysterious, like how God made this whole thing click and work. And to see the inside of that clock tick is just like, wow.
Yeah.
One who made this all is just mind-blowing.
Yep.
So that's probably what, like, and that's, I hope, me as an image of God person trying to take that serious, So
yep. So I think this this idea really plays out in a lot of different ways, and we want to spend, maybe not an episode with each way, but spend some episodes talking practically about what this means for us as followers of Jesus, and for us as this podcast, the Jubilee Freedom and Shalom podcast. We believe, like Nate just spelled out, the image of God is inherent. It's at the heart of it is a first principle to creating sense of shalom. And true freedom comes when you understand that you're an image bearer and start living that way. And Jubilee will come for people when they understand the character of God, when they come to terms with their relation to him and what he's asking for them. And eventually we can create shalom in the world because of how we believe and how we live out the character of God and reflect that in the world. So if you are willing, Nate, we can next week we can jump into some practical applications of being an image bearer.
Absolutely.
Cool.
I'm interested to do it, and I hope we can. I don't know. We want to talk through theology and the why, but also get to the how and
Love that.
And how we are personally trying to take that reality seriously.
That definitely informs the why, at least for me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool.
Well, thanks for the conversation.
Yeah, it was great. We love you guys. Thank you for supporting the podcast with your listens. Remember, we do have a Patreon. Just quick explanation. We're not pocketing that money. That is, we pay to host these episodes on all of these different platforms. And so any monthly contribution goes directly towards that. And if anything, if we ever get over that, it'll go to doing more things related to this. So
just go some seed money for starting a debt annihilation teams or something like that. But there's actually, let me just say this about Patreon. There's two different ways I think you can do it. You can either just do like a monthly thing where it's like, okay, I'm going to give him $1 a month or whatever. But yeah, I think you can actually do it for every episode that comes out. Give us like 25 cents or, whatever. So whatever thing we put out, you only give when we give. So there's a couple ways to go about doing that. But we really do appreciate everyone that supports us. And we hope we can continue to have these conversations and that it spurs on the imagination of the church.
Yep. All right. We'll talk to you guys next week.
All right. Peace.